We've got some big news. We're starting a new podcast community, and we want you to be a part of it. Head over to patreon.com/FemFreak to join the fun.
I had never seen any of this before, I don't
Me either.
think. And, I mean, it is some of the most, like, just raw, kind of vulnerable testimony that I've ever seen. Hello, and welcome to Feminist Frequency Radio. This is episode 67. I'm Carolyn Pettit, taking over hosting duties from Anita Sarkeesian this week, and I'm joined, as always, by my fellow tabloid news junkie, Ebony Adams. Hey, Ebony.
Hey, Carol. Can I wear one of those old-timey press hats with, like, the word press written on a little card shoved in the hat band?
Absolutely. I always love seeing those in old-timey movies and stuff. This is the show that asks you to be critical of the media you love, or alternatively, we're the feminist killjoys coming for your medias, depending on your perspective. Today, we're going to be talking about the Amazon Prime documentary series Lorena, which focuses on Lorena Bobbitt, who became the focus of a worldwide media frenzy in 1993 after she retaliated against her husband's prolonged abuse by cutting off his penis. And as always, we'll finish the show by each sharing a little something in What's Your Freak-Out? Now, on with the show. So, Ebony, we here at Feminist Frequency actually have an awful lot going on right now. And I feel like we should take a moment to talk about it. First of all, we have just launched a Patreon. That is at patreon.com/femfreak. And longtime listeners will know that we've been with drip, d.rip/femfreak for quite a while. And but we just, came to the conclusion that I think that at Patreon there's more features that will allow us to engage with our community more effectively. There's, direct Discord implementation so that you can automatically get set up as a member of our Discord server if you join, and, other things as well.
Yeah, I'm super excited for the shift to Patreon. And I am here and ready to answer any questions folks have about the slow transition to Patreon. We should make it clear that if you are currently a Drip subscriber, you do have time, should you decide to, which we hope that you will, to make the switch to Patreon. So we're not shutting down Drip by any means, like today at 5 p.m., and we really do anticipate a smooth transition. But y'all, Patreon is going to be so much better for delivering our feminist frequency jibber jabber to you.
Yeah, and there's also like an RSS feed for, all of our podcasts, which is something that some of you have requested before, but Drip just unfortunately didn't have the functionality to support that. So, just a lot of little quality of life things, I think, are going to make Patreon a good fit for us. So if you've never been a Feminist Frequency supporter before, there's never been a better time to hop on board. And, we have lots of cool perks for you. One perk that, if you're listening to this, you will already have missed out on, unfortunately, but I'm going to mention it anyway. People who join right now get early access to the Queer Tropes in video game series. Now,
Queer Tropes? What is this?
Yes, Ebony, Queer Tropes. Queer Tropes, let me tell you a little bit about it. It is a new 3-episode miniseries hosted by yours truly that delves into queer representations and queer identities throughout video game history. Of the 3 episodes kind of break down like this. We have one that just looks at general ways that games create kind of an atmosphere of homophobia or transphobia in their worlds, through the use of quote unquote humor and things like that. One is a close look at how villains in games are often queer or queer coded, and how that troublingly creates an association between queerness and kind of chaos and evil, as if queerness is something that needs to be vanquished or eradicated. And lastly, one of the episodes looks at how queer relationships have been portrayed in video games. So by the time this airs, all 3 episodes will be available and viewable on our YouTube channel. So please hop on over, check those out. Let us know what you think. We'd love to hear your thoughts on them. And yeah, we're really excited. Tomorrow, as we record this, tomorrow's going to be a big day.
Yeah, absolutely. And although this does not matter at all, Carolyn's hair looks beautiful.
Aw, thank you. All right. So I think, Ebony, it's time for you to bring us this week's entertainment news. What do you got for us?
Oh my God. I'm so nervous. Even though I've had to do this, before, I've had to step in to your pop culture shoes, your pop culture platforms a couple of times. I'm nervous about this because, we always give you the business about the pop culture breakdown you do. And now that I'm in the hot seat, I'm not ready. Okay.
Well, I'm very nice, right? If Anita were here, she may have some thoughts about your performance, but I will, I'm sure, only have nice things to say.
Even though she's not on the podcast, I do hear her in my ear being like, this is crap. So I'm going to push that to the back. Okay, so first, and the pop culture news I have for y'all this week, are these the biggest stories? No. Are these the most compelling stories? Also, no. Are these the stories that stood out to me? Not really, but these are the ones I landed on.
Okay.
One. Okay. No, listen, I actually was very interested in these three stories and what they kind of tell us about larger conversations that are happening about entertainment, about culture, about our understandings of gender, etc. So number one, Virgin Atlantic has just in the year of our Lord, 2019, dropped the requirement that female flight crew wear makeup while working. This just happened.
Now, I wonder if other airlines have a requirement like that in place.
Oh, absolutely. And still do. And, we have, there's been lots of conversations about the peculiarly and aggressively gendered requirements for air flight crews, depending upon the companies that they work for, whether that's, overt age discrimination, whether that's pregnancy discrimination, whether it's the ability to wear trousers, which to this day, there's some airlines that will not allow their female flight crews to wear trousers. I'm using the word trousers in lieu of pants because apparently pants means underwear in the UK, which makes me laugh. Anyway, this is horrifying to me that this requirement has just been dropped. And even though it has been dropped, the sort of coercion to wear makeup and to perform femininity in a certain way and to suggest availability in a certain way is such a holdover and is so obnoxious, in a way that I just really want people to think about.
Yeah, I mean, oftentimes when I fly, I almost feel like I'm sort of time traveling back to an episode of Mad Men or something in terms of how the flight crew, the women present themselves in a kind of I lost the word. I don't want to. Submissive isn't the right word, but like very, as you say, like traditionally feminine, kind of deferential, available, maybe a sort of way. Just very it just feels very old fashioned in a lot of ways. Just everything about the way that women in those professional roles are expected to present and to behave, which is why I feel like, Virgin Atlantic may only right now be getting rid of this requirement, but I think that the airline industry in general probably, still has a ways to go with regard to this.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it blows my mind every time I board a flight and, my flight is staffed by flight crews and the female flight are wearing heels. And I just think, what the fuck is happening? Because this is not a choice that's free from, like sort of social pressures. Any individual person's choice to wear heels at work, doesn't arise out of a cultural vacuum. It's not just that these people choose to wear heels, is that, it fits a certain model of, this very sort of nostalgic throwback, obliging person of service to you in this really gross gendered way. Anyways, small baby steps in heels, I guess.
There you go.
Yep.
What else you got for us?
Story number 2, Terry Crews, who, oh boy, it hurts me to talk about this. So Terry Crews, I was going to say friend of the podcast, even though he's never been on the podcast, but someone who has been a really vocal and thoughtful voice for victims during this, what's termed the Me Too era. Fantastic actor, fantastic artist, and seemingly just a really fantastic human being. Unfortunately, kind of tripped himself up over this past week in response to an article in which a Black female writer was tackling the way that President Obama seems to take young Black men to task in very specific ways. Terry Crews, over a series of tweets, asserted the position that children need male and female parents to truly develop into whole rounded human beings. And then, as he was questioned on this, sort of, just doubled down in a way that was incredibly disappointing and was very essentialist.
Yeah, he used the term, malnourished at one point.
Yeah, emotionally malnourished. Yeah.
Yeah, to describe a child who is raised by, same gender parents, or maybe by a single parent, presumably also would be a quote unquote malnourished child.
It's so disappointing because it obviously completely dismisses the kind of loving families that, same gender folks create, deliberate families that they create. But it also speaks to this really weird notion that boy children specifically have special needs that female or feminine coded folks cannot provide, in a way that we don't worry about girl children, right?
Right.
That there's something specifically about being a man that you can only get from cisgender straight men. It's disappointing. And he has since, apologized and tried to talk through what he meant, but it's clear that he still has this very kind of essentialist understanding of how to raise a child. But at least appears initially to be kind of listening and taking on board some of the responses that gratefully a lot of queer folks have been dropping in his mention. So Terry, we say do better.
Yeah.
We have hope that you will use this as a teaching moment or a learning moment.
Absolutely. Let's get to this next story before we run out of time, because I want to talk about this one a little bit too.
Yeah. Okay. So essentially, it is this Steven Spielberg, who I do not need to explain to people, is promoting this rule change within the Academy that would essentially sort of remove eligibility for Netflix films from being in contention for awards with traditional theatrical releases.
Right.
So Carol, go into that.
Yeah, I have feelings about this because I'm a movie lover, like I'm a cinema lover, and I do believe, like, I have that kind of purist movie lover view that yes, movies should be seen on the big screen. I do have that, and so when Roma was very briefly on the big screen here in San Francisco, I went out of my way to, in the very narrow window of time it was available, to go see it, because I had the privilege of living in a big city where I had that opportunity and I wanted to avail myself of it. But the reality is, right, that we now live in a world where, so many people don't live near big cities. They don't get access to the art house films in their areas and everything. Like, for many people, streaming services are by far the best or only way they really have to experience art cinema, great, cinema, world cinema. And this, to a certain sort of rule that, say, for instance, Roma, which is a tremendous film. It is a cinematic film. It is a movie through and through, in, every sense of the word. That a film of that kind of artistry and beauty and significance would not be eligible for an Academy Award just because it's a Netflix film. Like, it's absurd. It's just absurd.
Yeah, and I think, there's a lot to be teased out here, including the notion of what makes something a film, a theatrical release, versus what makes something a TV movie. Because, Spielberg says, I'm not arguing the quality of these films, and if they deserve to win awards, they deserve to win Emmys, not Oscars. So clearly there's this sort of understanding of what cinema is versus what, TV is. And there's still that implication that TV is, somehow a lesser or a younger brother to cinema, in a way that I think really needs to be talked about. But yeah, so there's, the notion of urban versus rural and, that kind of access and, economic privilege, but also just about, parents who aren't able to get, babysitters for their kids or whatever. But despite all of that, even if you have all of the privileges necessary to go see a film in the theater, how many of us watch movies on streaming services once they're out of the theaters? And yet that's really not a part of this discussion, that people already, for whatever reason, are consuming vast, overwhelmingly, via streaming services versus in the theater. So why that need to that insistence upon having a theatrical release? Anyways, there's a very, vibrant discussion about this happening on social media. So I encourage folks to dig in, if they're interested, which you should be, because I think this is a conversation that's not going to go away.
I couldn't agree more.
Can I take one last 30 seconds and ask you something? So
sure.
I saw this morning that Oscar Isaac apparently wants to throw his hat in the ring to play Snake.
Yeah.
In the movie of Metal Gear Solid. Does this seem like a good idea to you? Go.
I mean, I don't know if the idea of making a Metal Gear Solid movie, period, sounds like a good idea. But if that is something that has to happen, then I do think Oscar Isaac would be a very capable actor to fill that role.
Right on. Very diplomatic answer.
Yeah.
All right. That's all I got.
There is a lot of talk about supporting independent media creators, and we think it's as valuable as ever these days to do just that. If you value smart, honest, feminist analysis, then come join our podcast community at patreon.com/femfreak. Plus, you'll get access to some fun perks, including the Freakin' After Party, our weekly post-show bonus exclusively for our patrons. That's patreon.com/femfreak.
Late one night in June of 1993, a woman named Lorena Bobbitt reached the breaking point. After having suffered years of physical, psychological, and sexual abuse from her husband, Lorena grabbed a knife from the kitchen, went to where her husband was sleeping, and cut off his penis. The resulting court cases became a worldwide media frenzy, but amid all the jokes by late-night talk show hosts and the tabloid nature of so much of the news coverage, the deeper, vitally important issues of domestic abuse went largely overlooked. Now, a new 4-part miniseries on Amazon Prime called Lorena attempts to take a fresh look at the case, closely examining what Lorena endured as an individual, while also putting the case and its repercussions in the larger cultural context of ideas about men, women, marriage, and domestic abuse. Ebony, reactions to Lorena?
So I am very glad that you and Anita kept this documentary on my radar. I had heard about it, through people talking about Jordan Peele executive producing it. But like many others, I suspected that I knew enough about the case already to have not, found the topic interesting enough to queue it up. I thought,
right.
Okay, I know what happened. I know that, she alleged domestic violence, and I had sort of put it out of my mind. And I wonder if part of, sort of consigning it to, the vault of my memory was sort of, the distaste, the mild distaste I felt by the jokes, because it seemed as if people could not talk about Lorena Bobbitt or John Wayne Bobbitt without making some sort of tired ass joke about it, right? And I was just like, I don't need to get into that. I'm just not interested. So I was so glad that y'all kept this on the radar and wanted to talk about it on the podcast, because I was absolutely just shaken by this documentary. And I should note, I have not been able to finish the 4th episode yet. Foolishly, I tried to watch all of the episodes back to back. I do not encourage that kind of binging for a documentary like this. It does not give you the space you need emotionally or mentally or even intellectually to process what you are seeing and what you are hearing. So I'm so glad that I watched it. I will finish watching the case, but I have to say, between this, the R. Kelly documentary, the new Finding Neverland documentary, I think we are entering a moment where we are doing some of the hard work that is so overdue. And I think specifically about the ways that we talk about not just, violence against vulnerable people, but like in the situation of this documentary specifically, it really reveals how completely unprepared we are culturally to both talk about or understand domestic violence.
Yeah, I agree. I think this the documentary series does something very smart at the very beginning, right? It really puts this in context right off the bat because it recalls the Anita Hill hearings. It recalls the tailhook controversy. It recalls the Robert Kennedy Smith trial and verdict. So it reminds us of all of these high-profile instances of women being sexually harassed or assaulted or raped, and the men getting away with it because the men are, were viewed culturally, were viewed by juries, were viewed just, by the media in many cases as being the ones with the authority and the credibility, and the women were just, doubted. The women were always the ones who were doubted. And obviously the Bobbitt case then became a kind of flashpoint of attempts really by, we see throughout the documentary, like the now, the National Organization of Women, I think, and other groups really, really trying to use this case as a way to bring domestic abuse to the forefront of the national conversation. But it seemed that the case was so inherently kind of sensational, or salacious in nature. And it just lent itself so much to tabloid coverage and to late night talk show jokes and things that people couldn't really, or often, the men that were probably in charge of media organizations and things that could have put that spin on it just weren't interested in doing so, weren't interested in doing the work needed to really make the conversation what it needed to be about the much larger issues of domestic violence and domestic abuse, and what are women supposed to do as recourse when they are trapped, or feel trapped in a situation where they are essentially enduring a kind of torture, and they don't feel like they have any recourse for that.
Yeah, I found it so interesting. There's a very small moment. But so during the course of the series, we talked to both Lorena Bobbitt, John Bobbitt, the law enforcement and legal officials who were involved with the case. We talked to, or hear from journalists who reported on the story. And we also hear from former neighbors of Lorena Bobbitt and also former friends of John Bobbitt. Some of the neighbors, the married couple who are, filmed on the couch.
Yeah.
There's this really interesting scene where the wife there talks about how in her first marriage, she was abused and how you just don't talk about it. You just don't talk about it. But the ways that she offered or tried to offer assistance to Lorena, when she was made aware of what was going on. And it just really, put in, kind of starkly highlighted these unofficial underground networks of care that vulnerable people are basically their only option, like were it not for, those neighbors who came forward and tried to help her, or her friend allowing her to sleep on the couch, she would have truly been left adrift because law enforcement and the media just wanted to feed on her in this story like a carcass. I mean, the recounting of how Geraldo Rivera essentially stalked her
Oh, absolutely.
Was horrifying. I mean, horrifying, and then also just like mind blowing, because apparently he was sending her like signed 8x10 shots, promo shots of him. Like, what the fuck?
Yeah, I know, what a clown. But I really appreciate that this documentary series really looks at all the important angles. I mean, including the whole media coverage angle. And, you know, you have at one point Carlos Sanchez, who was was a Washington Post reporter who was, covering the story at the time. And he says at one point, basically, he says, there's this sense that reporters are able to balance the need to compete with ethical concerns. But he says flat out, the pressures of competition will always win. And so, I personally am of the opinion that we should not, that ratings-driven news, on like for-profit networks like NBC, ABC, CBS, or whatever, like that we should not have ratings-driven news coverage, because it's purely then, it does become that if it bleeds, it leads, sensationalized, like basically a form of news that does not serve the public interest at all. And, but that's the reality is that news organizations are constantly, competing with each other to get the most sensational, interview, or to write the most kind of provocative, but not necessarily newsworthy, story that they can write or that they can produce.
Yeah, and it was very interesting. Once Lorena's trial gets underway, one of the reporters talks about how it was pretty quickly upstaged, at least partially, by the Tonya Harding, Nancy Kerrigan story, the Menendez brothers story. And so, like, it was just this very crystallized moment of, yes, tabloid journalism, where having sort of, important and nuanced and, human stories about what was going on with, Tonya Harding and Nancy Kerrigan, with the Menendez brothers, with Lorena Bobbitt. That's not what people are serving. And we can't even say they're serving us something because that's what we want. The fact is, this is what you are delivering. There were no alternatives to it. It was very telling to watch these old, news footage of people commenting on the Lorena and John case. And you have, people essentially saying, yeah, like, what are you supposed to do when you're pushed past your breaking point, versus people saying, nah, I think she's just a crazy bitch or whatever. The recognition that those opinions are formed by the quality and type of, coverage of this that they're getting. And by and large, we were ill-served by the kind of coverage that we were getting.
There were, to be fair, a few attempts in various media outlets or shows to maybe have a somewhat more substantive discussion about the issues. But, one of the clips we see that I found particularly just intriguing in the light of 2019 is that there's a clip from, I think, 1994 of Katha Pollitt on Charlie Rose. And, she says on Charlie Rose, quote, women have been abused for centuries and men have been getting away with it. And now the tables have turned a little bit. But history bears out that really, nothing really changed. Maybe there were more battered women's shelters, and maybe there were some more programs and a bit more awareness about issues of domestic violence. But really, in terms of the larger cultural conversation or awareness of men being able to get away with these kinds of things, I don't think anything really changed. We still live, even to this day, we live under patriarchy. We live in rape culture. And so, it was interesting, of course, that of all people, like that clip it was with Charlie Rose, who of course has, in the past few years, his career has been impacted by, accusations of sexual harassment. He is, one of the many male victims of the Me Too movement. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So anyway, yeah, I want to talk about John a little bit.
Yeah,
because,
definitely.
So John, his first, his defense lawyer before Lorena's trial, John's trial happens. And, he's, ultimately he's found not guilty. And, his lawyer, basically says that John is incapable of telling a lie, right? And I think that maybe the jury maybe kind of believed that because, there's a level in which John doesn't seem what we might think of as clever enough to lie, to weave a web of lies. But the reality is that it really doesn't take cleverness to just deny something. And like all John does, and we see that it is a pattern throughout his life and that he has a legacy of abusing women, in the years after Lorena, truly horrific stuff. And it's very easy for him to just like say, no, I never did that. No, I didn't do that. No, I don't use violence. I'm not a violent person. All he does is lie. And in fact, it's very easy for so many men in these situations to just deny and to know to some degree that because they are men, they have the credibility, right? The authority that they can say that and they may very well be believed.
There's a very real way in which John Bobbitt was not the only one on trial in that moment. What was on trial there was, rape culture and kind of straight white male privilege. And so the entire kind of institutional and cultural force that props up straight white male privilege was, working on his behalf to make sure that he was acquitted. And against that, you have Lorena Bobbitt, and we'll go into this later. But, this woman who's characterized as a hot-blooded Latina, an immigrant, someone who can't live within her means, etc. And so for every person who is inclined to not give the benefit of the doubt to women victims, it was just made that much easier to, grant John the kind of authority to craft this narrative that he was the victim of this crazy bitch, right? And so I remember very clearly during the course of this news story, how, when they would show pictures of John Bobbitt, it was almost always with him in his Marine uniform, as if to suggest that this clean cut, young man, who is honorable enough to serve in our nation's armed forces, as she says, dripping with sarcasm, could not possibly have done the thing to this woman that he is being accused of having done. And so I love that we get in the first episode of this show, there's so much that the documentary is going to show us and so many different elements that it's going to, emphasize are important to our understanding of this story. So from the very beginning, we learn about the role that race is going to play in our understanding of this case, the role that gender essentialism is going to play, and the role that class is going to, there's, from the very beginning, we are, led to understand this is both a much more complicated story than you perhaps are aware of, but also it's much simpler, and that this is the kind of thing that, vulnerable people have had to suffer for so long. And here is why they keep getting exploited, both by their abusers and by the systems that are supposed to be designed to protect them.
Yeah, we hear from so many people in, mostly clips from the time, but the same ignorant questions and statements that we still hear today of so we see, for instance, at one point, Alan Dershowitz, fucking Alan Dershowitz, man. We see him saying what you do is get out, you leave, you don't do what she did, right? It's, to this day, it's like, well, why didn't, whenever a situation, a case like this becomes somewhat public or, gets taken on by the news media. It's like, well, why didn't she report it? Why didn't she just leave? It's this profound ignorance of all the reasons, and all the reasons why women so often feel like they are trapped in relationships with their abusers, or like they just don't have their leaving may often put them in more danger, for instance, right? Women are often killed after they leave their abusers. I mean, it's absurd the way that so many people just respond as if, oh, why didn't she just leave? Or why didn't she just do this? As if it's just like it was an option that was just sitting there on the table that she could have taken at any time.
Right. And, we demand of women and victims that they perform their trauma for us, but also perform a certain degree of, what we consider to be like legitimate kind of violence, right? Reenacting it. So, these experts come on and they talk about how definitions of marital rape in Virginia at this time, this happened in Manassas, Virginia, were so narrow and included things like, you had to have shown a certain degree of force. You had to have certain, proof that there was like a certain degree of lasting damage, like these narrow rules to prove that something was in fact marital rape. And if you cannot, demonstrate within those very rigid and narrow guidelines, then what's the point of coming forward?
Right.
What is the point of, subjecting yourself to that additional violence when, you're not going to be listened to or believed anyway?
So, speaking of, being believed, we see a lot of Lorena's actual courtroom testimony in this documentary. And I had never seen any of this before, I don't think. And I mean, it is some of the most just raw, kind of vulnerable testimony that I've ever seen footage of. I mean, the way that you can tell that the things that she is saying, the things that she has to say in this court in public in front of all these people are so wrapped up in shame and fear and discomfort and, horror and everything. I mean, I'm watching this and I'm like, what a goddamn hero to get up and to say these true things that, I mean, that we, that women are so taught to hate themselves for when these things are, if these things are done, even though these things are done to them, there's just almost inevitably, going to be shame and associated with these things. And I mean, the way that she is able to summon the courage and the wherewithal to give voice to these things as hard as it is for her and as incredibly difficult as you can tell that it is for her, it's remarkable to watch.
Boy, it was so harrowing to watch the camera linger on Lorena as she was giving her testimony. And it was so necessary, but God damn, I wanted to reach through the screen and escort her out of the building. It is unconscionable to me that she had to do this. The moment where she's on the stand and one of the attorneys asks her to recreate what it was like when John was choking her, and she has to hold her own hands up to her neck and demonstrate how someone almost killed her. Oh my God.
I know.
It was again, please do not binge or try to binge episode after episode of this show. It's not going to do you any favors. But what I wanted to say was, importantly, tellingly, cameras were not allowed into the courtroom during John's trial, but they were for Lorena's. And the reason given for that is that cameras are typically not allowed in courtrooms when the crime that is, being adjudicated is considered a sex crime. And because Lorena was charged with malicious wounding, despite the kind of, lurid aspects of how that malicious wounding played out, cameras were allowed in. And so we get to see exactly what it requires from victims to be considered credible and worthy of justice. Back in the first episode, I was we talked to jurors from both John's trial and Lorena's trial. And two of the jurors speak about John's trial, one man, one woman, and the dude made me want to kick my TV screen over. The way that he talked about how Lorena looked in the courtroom and how she failed to maintain the theme, he said, of being credible, because some days she would wear, in his words, demure kind of housewife clothes, and sometimes she was kind of more dressed up and wore makeup and her hair was done, and she just didn't maintain the theme. And the way that's
so revealing. Yeah.
Exactly.
So revealing.
Exactly. And so then you have that contrasted with the female juror who talks about how, she didn't find John Bobbitt credible at all. She found Lorena Bobbitt very credible. And then go back to the male juror who says, like, a lot of people just, they talk about what they know in their heart, but you can't decide by what you know in your heart. You have to go by what's in your head and what's laid out in front of you. The illusion of objectivity and rationality that men use as a cloak, even though their decisions and their assumptions are just as guided by emotion, was mind-boggling to me, but so telling. I was so, it was such a perfect moment that the filmmakers put there.
Yeah, absolutely. I also briefly want to mention, I was surprised that during Lorena's trial, two, younger men who had been friends with John and who, he had engaged with in locker room talk, quote unquote, to whom he had spoken very openly about, enjoying, forcing sex on women and things like that, that these, young men had kind of broken the male patriarchal code and testified, about all these things that he had said. And, I just think that's interesting that because very often men will not, betrays, what it's considered betrayal within the circles of masculinity where that code functions of this is just how men are and how we talk to each other. And you don't go around saying that to other people but everyone knows that's just how guys are, or how guys talk. I was really, I was very glad that they made that choice to testify, because unfortunately I do think that, testimony from men about another man is often going to carry more weight, unfortunately, than a woman's testimony about a man's character.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also, appreciated how this documentary took pains. Again, we saw and spoke to, past neighbors, these past friends, of the couple, because it illustrates how these things happen both in an intensely intimate micro environment, but how they occur within the context of a larger community in which some members of that community are complicit in the abuse that happens. And some people are witnesses. And then, there are some people who, try to be interventionists such that they can be. And so on the one hand, you have these young men who are 19, 20 that John is playing with, who are saying, yeah, I have to be a witness in this case. I have to tell what I saw. It's important for me because this man has done something unconscionable, versus his fucking brother, who is shown in a past Jenny Jones episode or something, literally talking about going on a hunt for Lorena, as if he wanted to kill her. And also being in the car when John strikes Lorena for the very first time and, non-verbally gives his both assent and approval to John, to treat Lorena that way. I think this documentary is so well done. It is incredibly hard to watch. But please take the time. There's something so important going on here, both about our understanding of this case, but also a larger exploration of, God, so much race and gender and rape culture and patriarchy. When John Bobbitt literally fixes his fucking mouth to say, she was from South America, she didn't know how to live within her means, I almost ripped my TV down from the wall and threw it off the balcony. Fuck this man. Oh my God.
Yeah. Yeah, it's I agree. I encourage everyone to watch it. There's so much substance here that we weren't even able to scratch the surface of. It's tremendously revealing, thought-provoking, and important. So do check out Lorena. All 4 episodes are on Amazon Prime right now. So yeah,
check it out. I could have spent an entire hour just talking about that urologist who says that John was going to have to sit to pee like a woman. Oh my God, so much to unpack here.
All right, it's time now for everybody's favorite segment.
What's your deal? What's your deal?
What's your deal?
Yes!
Yes.
I probably just blew out everybody's speakers. Sorry about that, y'all.
Ebony, what's your deal this week?
Okay, my freak out this week is something that hopefully all of you know about already, but if you don't, please do yourself a favor and listen to the Code Switch podcast, which is hosted by Gene Denby. It's an NPR podcast hosted by Gene Denby and Shireen Marisol Meraji. This show, week on week, is bringing such a tight, incisive, but humorous and accessible approach to race, culture, politics, and it is so community-oriented and responsive. So many of the show topics, week on week, have been submitted by listeners. Gene Denby and Shireen, please follow them on Twitter. They're both just incredibly brilliant writers, thinkers, journalists, right? I want to shout out in particular 2 episodes that I recently listened to. And I think they actually were both from 2018, but go hit up the vault and check them out. One was on words and the sort of secret history of racism embedded in some of our terminology. And this particular episode, they were talking about the term white trash and its history. And it's an absolutely fascinating dive into the history of that term, who used it, who deploys it, how exactly it works, etc. But also they talk about then not a linguistic phrase, but a musical phrase. And they're talking specifically about the 9-note riff that kind of denotes something Asian. And Phil, our producer, I'm asking you to put this in when this episode drops.
Yes, right?
Yes, so, immediately recognizable. And they do this just wonderful, have this wonderful discussion with ethnomusicologists and historians, et cetera, about how that particular 9-note riff came to be, what it references, how it seems to be just so instantly recognizable across generations, the fact that it doesn't, come from any specific piece of music, etc. It was just fascinating. So that was great. But then there was also a really interesting episode called Pretty Hurts. And the bit that really, I just latched onto was, beauty culture's sort of fascination with what's called K-beauty right now, Korean beauty regimens, which are huge right now in the makeup industry and the beauty world, and how it figures in this larger constellation during this cultural moment of K-cool. So Korean boy bands, K-dramas, etc. And how, the plastic surgery that has become so popular in places like South Korea, including things like the double eyelid surgery, have been understood and misunderstood by white commentators as an attempt for Koreans to look more white, but how in Asian context, double eyelid surgery is marked as looking specifically Korean, and how the double eyelid surgery was in fact pioneered by a white doctor, an incredibly racist white doctor after the Korean War. It's fascinating. Within each 30-minute episode, I feel like I've taken a graduate seminar. So sorry to take so long, but the show is the bomb. Code Switch, Gene Denby, Shireen Marisol Meraji. Can't get enough.
Awesome. My freak out this week is actually something that I only found out about this morning. In fact, I think it was only announced this morning. So we're recording this on Monday, March 4th. So I've talked about on FFR before my deep concern about labor issues in the game industry. And often, within feminist frequency, we often focus on the media itself, what's produced, the representations in the movies we watch, the games we play, the television, the comics we read, et cetera, et cetera. And those things are supremely important. But it's also very, very important that tremendous structural change happen within the organizations and the bodies that produce a lot of media. Specifically, the exploitation of laborers within video games has become an increasingly heated discussion in the past year and even within just the past few months. So today, Bethany Hockenberry and Scott Benson, who are the creators of Night in the Woods, the phenomenal game Night in the Woods, announced today that they have just opened, they have just launched their worker-owned and operated cooperative for making video games called the Glory Society. You can follow this organization, this group on Twitter at the Glory Society. Scott Benson, Bombs Fall on Twitter, said in one of his tweets something that I think is incredibly true. He said, and I quote, "As creators, we need to go beyond, quote unquote, only making slightly more woke games and doing a lot of big talk about what needs to change culturally. And we need to actually start changing the way games are produced and demanding better for others." So to see him and Bethany, and I think their partner in this, Ren Farron, really putting their money where their mouths have been for so long. I mean, Scott is so deeply committed to issues, around labor, and labor justice, economic justice. And so this is just, I think, a hugely important act, a hugely important step in working toward the kinds of change the games industry needs. And, also GDC, the Game Developers Conference, is coming up later this month. It sounds like there's going to be so much political action there and discussion around pushing for unionization within the games industry. So I'm really excited about that. But for now, I just want to shout out the Glory Society. Follow them on Twitter at the Glory Society to keep up on the games they're making and what they're doing to fight for better labor practices within the games industry. This week, we also have a listener freakout. This freakout comes to us from listener Tom. Take it away, Tom.
Hello, Anita, Carolyn, and Ebony. This is Tom from New York, and my freakout is a podcast called Zigzag. The show features Manoush Samarudi and Jen Poyant, who, after years of working in public radio, decide to start their own media company. They talk about their experiences as journalists, the role that sexism and the Me Too movement played in their careers, and the risks that they've taken to start this business. The show is in its third season, and you can totally pick it up there, but I highly recommend listening to it from the first episode. Fair warning, they initially fund their company through a blockchain startup called Civil, so the first season has a fair amount of discussion about cryptocurrency. While that sounds about as enjoyable as a trip to the dentist, they do it in a way that's really engaging and easy to understand. So yeah, check out Zigzag. And thanks.
Thank you so much, Tom. You can submit your own freakout and it might make it onto the show. Just head over to femfreak.com/freakout. That's FREQOUT. All right, everybody, that's our show. You can catch us back here every single Wednesday. Stay tuned for the Freakin' After Party, which is only available to backers of this podcast, which you can be. Just head over to patreon.com/femfreak. If you're enjoying the show, please rate and review us on iTunes and tell your friends too. You can check out all of our work and our other podcasts at feministfrequency.com, so be sure to follow us on Twitter at femfreak to stay up to date on all the news. You can find us on Twitter. You can find Anita at Anita Sarkeesian. You can find me at Carolyn Michelle.
You can find me at Stop Posting Pictures of the Momo Challenge.
Amen. Woo, that thing is creepy. Our producer is Phil Circus, who also composed our theme music. Technical support by Sarah Norales, production assistance by Taylor Simmons, and art by Jamie Varon. We'll see you next week.
Bye.